The last thing Clara said to her mother was, "Maybe my life would have been easier if you had just let me live it." Those words returned to her every morning, before her eyes were fully open, before she even remembered where she was. They waited for her like a shadow at the edge of her thoughts. No matter how much she tried to push them away, they remained sharp, unchangeable, and final. Her mother had died the next day. Clara never imagined that the last conversation she would have with the woman who raised her would end in anger. If she had known, she would have spoken differently. She would have chosen silence over pride, patience over frustration. But no one knows which moment will become the last. And that was the cruelty of it. The argument began like so many others before it, quietly, almost harmlessly. Clara had stopped by her mother's house after work on a rainy Tuesday evening. The small house still smelled the same as it always had: cinnamon, old books, and lavender soap. The familiar scent usually comforted her, but that day she felt tired before she even stepped inside. Her mother, Eleanor, was sitting at the kitchen table with a cup of tea, the lamplight soft against her silver hair. "You look exhausted," Eleanor said gently. "Are you working too hard again?" Clara sighed as she set her bag down. "I'm fine, Mom. You say that every time," Eleanor replied, the faint crease of worry appearing between her brows. "But you never seem happy." The conversation moved along a path they both knew too well, Eleanor's. Questions came from concern, but to Clara they felt like quiet judgments. Her mother had always wanted stability for her steady work, a family, a life that made sense. Clara had spent years trying to prove she could choose her own path. "I am happy," Clara insisted, though the words sounded thinner than she intended. Her mother studied her face in silence. "You're 34 and still drifting from one job to another. I just worry you're making things harder for yourself." Clara felt the familiar frustration rise in her chest. "You think everything I do is wrong," she said. "That's not what I said, it's what you mean." Eleanor shook her head slowly. "Clara, I only want what's best for you." Clara laughed, though there was no humor in it. "Your idea of what's best for me." For a moment, neither of them spoke. Rain tapped softly against the kitchen window. Eleanor's voice, when she spoke again, was tired but steady. "I spent my life trying to give you a future. Forgive me if I still care about what happens to you." The words should have softened Clara. Instead, they pushed something inside her that had been building for years. "I didn't ask you to decide my future," Clara said, her voice rising. "You've always treated me like I don't know what I am doing." "That's not fair." "What's not fair," Clara replied sharply, "is you acting like I am a disappointment because I didn't live the life you imagined." Her mother's expression changed, then not anger, but hurt. "I have never said you were a disappointment. You didn't have to," Clara said. Bitterly, another silence filled the kitchen, heavier than the last. Clara should have stopped there. She could still remember the exact moment when the conversation could have turned around. A simple apology would have been enough. Even a change of subject. But pride is stubborn when it's wounded. That was when she said it. "Maybe my life would have been easier if you had just let me live it." The words hung in the air between them. Eleanor didn't respond right away. She simply looked at Clara with an expression Clara had never seen before, a quiet sadness that seemed deeper than anger. Finally, she spoke. "I thought I was helping you." Clara grabbed her coat. "I don't need help anymore." She left before her mother could say anything else. The next morning, Clara's phone rang while she was still half asleep. A stranger's voice told her there had been an emergency during the night. Her mother had collapsed in the living room. A neighbor found her. The doctors believed it was her heart. By the time Clara arrived at the hospital, everything was already over. In the weeks that followed, Clara moved through her life like someone wandering through a familiar house in the dark. The funeral passed in a blur of quiet condolences and distant relatives. People spoke about Eleanor's kindness, her patience, her devotion as a mother. Clara nodded politely, thanking them with a voice that barely sounded like her own. But inside, one thought repeated endlessly. Those were the last words she heard from me. She returned to her mother's house a few days later to sort through her belongings. The house was silent in a way that felt unnatural. The clock on the wall ticked loudly. The kitchen table still held the same small lamp and the same chair where Eleanor had been sitting that night. Clara ran her hand across the wooden surface. She imagined her mother sitting there again, holding her tea, looking up with that familiar mixture of love and concern. "I thought I was helping you." Clara sank into the chair, her chest tightening as the memory replayed in painful detail. Why had she been so cruel? Her mother had spent her entire life caring for her. Even their arguments had come from love, and Clara had walked away. She opened one of the kitchen drawers. Searching for something she wasn't sure what, inside was a small stack of folded papers. Clara recognized her mother's handwriting immediately. They were notes, little reminders, grocery lists, unfinished thoughts. One of them caught her attention. "Call Clara tonight. Ask how her new project is going. She sounded excited last week." Clara stared at the words until they blurred. Her mother had been trying to show interest. Not criticism. The realization struck with painful clarity. All those years Clara believed her. Mother doubted her, when in truth she had simply been worried. Clara lowered her head onto the table and wept. "I didn't mean it," she whispered into the empty room. But the room did not answer. Time, she discovered, moves forward without mercy. Apologies cannot cross the distance between the living and the dead. Months later, Clara still spoke to her mother, sometimes quietly, when no one else was around. "I'm sorry," she would say. She hoped, in some quiet corner of the universe, the words might still reach her, but the final ones could never be taken back, and that was the grief Clara would carry for the rest of her life.